One subject that fascinates film buffs like me is lost films. More notably, lost silent films, as they were made in a time before proper film archiving and copying, so many films didn't survive. They were thrown away, destroyed in warehouse fires, or deteriorated over time to the point that they could no longer be projected. Many of this mass destruction of films occurred during the World Wars, as the film was often burned to be recycled into materials vital for the war effort. In addition, many studios and warehouses were bombed during air raids. Over 90% of all films made between the 1890s and 1920s are lost. Famous examples of these films include the horror classic, London After Midnight, 1926, as well as the first film adaptation of F. Scott Fitzgerald's famous 1925 novel, The Great Gatsby. For a long time, many of special effects pioneer George Ismailis's films were thought to have been destroyed, but over the years many of them have since been recovered and restored. I work as a film editor, and I have reviewed and edited several vintage films for release. These films are usually in the public domain, as back in the day many filmmakers did not copyright their work, as this was before 1977 when copyrighting work became a law. Many of these old public domain films have been uploaded online. Usually, I review and edit these films and email the edited files to my boss, who then makes them available for download and online distribution onto sites such as YouTube. However, there is one film I have seen which I never bothered to edit. It is a film that continues to haunt me, which I think about each day, and which for weeks, if not months after viewing had a strong and effective influence on my nightmares. To this day my boss knows nothing about it. I have never heard back from the person who sent the unedited film to me. Maybe this is because he got a new job and didn't tell me, but now I'm starting to wonder if he actually killed himself after he ended up in the same mental situation as me, except he couldn't take it anymore. The film I am referring to is Enfant no Yeux Noir, a short, 15-minute film by French filmmaker Jacques Moulin, made in 1913. I know little of this Moulin guy, though from what I've heard he made this after a severe depression caused by the death of his newlywed wife. It was his attempt at making a truly surrealist film 15 years before Luis Buñuel and Salvador Dali produced Un Chien Andalou, 1929. The film was rumored to have caused riots in Paris upon release, which was soon overshadowed by the outbreak of World War I only months after its release. Not much is known all about Moulin after that, other than his death date in around 1915. For a long time, Enfant no Yeux Noir was considered a lost film. The last surviving copy of the film was thought to have been destroyed during the German bombing of Paris in World War II. Though the film was lost, there were a few surviving stills of the film that surfaced on the internet in the late 1990s. As of now, only 2 stills are left, both of the same scene. The scene these 2 shots were taken from was set at a gazebo. The first shot was a low-quality still of a gazebo in a garden, where a woman, I think it was a woman, was sitting, she back turned away from the camera. The second shot was of that same gazebo, except instead of a woman in the gazebo, there was a child standing still, facing the camera. These 2 shots fascinated me, and for a long time, they were the only shots thought to have survived. That was, until recently. One day I got an email from Derek, a friend and co-worker of mine. His job was to convert the original film reels into digital files so that I could edit them. I'd already told him about Enfant and how it, like many other lost films, really fascinated me. Of course, at the time I thought that the film was lost forever. But I always imagined, what was that movie like? Sometimes, finally seeing a piece of media that was lost for decades can be extremely disappointing. Like, what if the film was just 15 minutes of Jacques Moulin's daily life, spending time with his wife and family? It could make sense, since movies that just depicted daily, unconnected events with no real plot could have been considered surreal at the time. I would feel super disappointed, and really angry. But Derek seemed very enthusiastic in this email, as the title was "I Found IT." In all caps. This is what it read. "Hey there. You know how you told me about that one old French film about the black babies? Well, look no more. I recently received a stash of old films that some guy found in an old film vault in France. On one of the film reels he sent me, The Black-Eyed Children was written on the label. I remembered the film you told me about, and I immediately thought of you. I sent the guy an email and thanked him for finding the film and sending it to me. His response, however, was negative. He got really angry at me for some reason, saying that he watched it, but 8 minutes in he started crying, to the point that he forcibly pulled the reel off the projector. Strange, huh? I decided not to waste my time and watch the whole thing, but I did convert it to a digital file so you can see for yourself. I promise I'll get around to watching it soon. Thanks. Derek. I can't tell you how excited I was when I got that email. Ever finally found something you've been looking for years? It was a huge relief for me. My heart was pounding as I downloaded the file, and I slid round in my desk chair as it downloaded. For some reason, the download took about an hour, which was odd, since most of the movies I've edited downloaded in a matter of minutes. How could a 15-minute film take so long to download, yet a 2-hour film could download quicker? It just didn't make sense to me. When the film finally downloaded, I clicked on it and opened up in QuickTime Player. And yes, QuickTime took about 10 minutes to load. You'd think that with such a slow download speed and opening speed, that the movie would buffer for a really long time before starting. But, much to my surprise, the movie started the instant the player opened without buffering at all. The first shot was of the opening title, which just read on fond aux noir in white text over a black screen. Then, the opening shot abruptly started, and it was the shot of the gazebo. I was shaking with excitement and anticipation. After years and years of mystery and occasional feelings of hopelessness, I finally was able to watch this long-lost film. The scene was much clearer to make out on film than in the still. I watched as a woman in a white gown slowly and carefully walked down the path to the gazebo. It was hard to make out the expression on her face given the poor quality of the film, but it seemed as if she was crying. She went to the gazebo and sat down, her back turned away from the camera. This sequence went on for a few seconds, before a caption with some text appeared, in French of course. Now, I don't know French, so I had no idea what the titles read. This caption card stayed on screen for about 5 seconds before briefly cutting back to the gazebo. Then, suddenly, it cut to a scene of a man sitting at a small table, with his head down, as if he was depressed. Suddenly, he yanked his head up, his eyes disturbingly wide open, first looking at the camera, then glancing toward the left. It then cut to a shot of a door. A caption card with French word repeated twice appeared, before cutting back to the door. The man opened it, and behind the door was a small child. For a few frames, I swore it briefly cut to a close-up of the child's face, but it went by too quick to make out any facial details. It cut back to the image of the child standing in the doorway. This time the man was gone. Another caption card appeared, which contained a wall of text written in French. but it went by too quickly for anyone to read. The next scene was of an empty room. The light was pouring in, so there must have been a window out of the camera's view. For about 10 seconds the room was empty. Suddenly, a man, the same man who opened the door for the child in the previous scene, walked out from behind the camera. He dragged a chair across the floor and set it right in the middle of the room. Then it cut to yet another caption card in French, before cutting back to the gazebo, where the woman was still sitting. The same man from the previous 2 scenes slowly crept up behind her. Who was this man? It seemed as if he was the central character of the movie. I watched as he suddenly grabbed the woman's hair, untying it and dragging her across the ground, while she violently kicked and thrashed about, trying to break free. Even though their movie had no sound, I could tell that she was screaming in agony, crying for help. That's when I realized, holy shit, that's Jacques Moulin, and he's abusing his wife. As soon as I realized that, the film cut to a shot of the house on fire. Then it cut back to the room with the chair, except this time, someone was sitting in the chair, which I was certain was Moulin's wife. This sequence of his wife went on for 2 minutes. Just his wife, sitting there, motionless, her back turned to the camera. I began to think that she was dead. Or maybe Moulin was yelling at her from behind the camera, but I couldn't tell, because, just like the screaming, there was no sound. Following the 2 minutes, a title card appeared. Thankfully, it stayed on the screen long enough to be read. Even though it was in French, it said something along the lines of this. L'enfant yux noirist le cadavre vivant d'un ange mort, banni du ciel et pleurant les larmes d'un dieu déchirant. After the title card was over, shit really started to go down. I'd rather not share in detail the next 8 minutes of the film. But I'll tell you that it was no surprise why it made the guy cry so much. I saw horrible images flash by my eyes. They were terrible things, evil things, things that looked like they came straight out of a video of someone's nightmare. My heart was pounding, and I began to feel lightheaded and dizzy. The images flashed before my eyes, faster than the mind could comprehend. Thousands of them. It was as if there was a horrific image on each frame. It is hard to imagine where Moulin was able to get all these pictures in the days before the internet. They looked like something right off the deep web. About 3 minutes into the hellish compilation, the images went from being creepy nightmare fuel to just being outright disgusting. I could catch a few clear glimpses of some frames that especially stood out to me as being truly graphic and nightmare-inducing, and those made me want to vomit. In fact, I began to tear up, and I began to feel like I was being watched. The film was just becoming too much for me. I wanted to unplug my computer, but the images on the screen kept me paralyzed, and too afraid to move. I tried my hardest to pull myself together and not pass out. After what seemed like hours, the horrific nightmare sequence finally ended, and I was greeted by yet another horrific sight. It was a close-up of the child's face, the same one that had briefly flashed on the screen in an earlier scene. His eyes were missing. That Moulin had taken the time to carefully black out his eyes on every single frame of the child's face. A single tear of dark liquid, which I assumed was blood, trickled down from his empty eye socket. He was obviously staring at the camera, but it felt more as if he was staring at me. Then it cut back to Moulin's wife in the room. I watched as she slowly turned her head to the camera, revealing her face, or at least what was left of it. It was horribly scarred up, to the point that she didn't look human. All the skin had been scraped off her face, and her eyelids appeared to have been burnt off. Her lips were pretty much torn off, revealing her gums and teeth, several of which appeared to have been knocked out. I was trembling. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, and her head practically exploded, leaving a large splotch of blood on the wall in front of her. The rest of her body fell onto the floor, and the camera continued rolling for another 20 seconds. I was waiting for something else to pop up, like the child's face, or yet another story montage. But none of that happened. Instead, that was the end of the movie. His wife's head blowing up. The scene faded to black without even an end card. For a moment my heart was pounding. There was no way that was done with special effects. That headshot had to be real. Then, it dawned on me. I just saw Moulin murder his wife. That scene where he drags her through the garden. That was obviously abused. He had abused her to the point where her face was mutilated beyond recognition, before finishing her off with a shotgun. I realized that only a few short years later, Moulin would use that same shotgun to shoot himself in a similar fashion. That night I had great difficulties falling asleep. Whenever I tried closing my eyes, stills from the movie were ingrained into the back of my eyelids. I don't know how long I was awake for, but I only slept a few dreamless hours that night. The next day, the movie was all that was on my mind. I couldn't do anything else but think about what I had just seen. I was probably the only one in the world who had sat through the entirety of Jacques Moulin's lost movie, Enfant no Yeux Noir. The few people who knew about it had only seen the 2 frames. Suddenly, I remembered the 2 frames. I remember seeing the scene of Moulin's wife, crying at the gazebo. But what about the scene of the child standing in the middle of it? I don't remember seeing that scene in the movie. Was it one of the frames from the montage from hell? No, it couldn't have been, as I would have been able to spot it, and no such image was in that revolting compilation. I decided to do a Google search for Enfant no Yeux Noir. I clicked on one of the links that talked about the movie. And sure enough, the frame of the child in the gazebo was there. I scrolled down, reading about the mystery of the film and Moulin's life. But at the bottom of the page, I saw something new. It was a picture of the original film reel. On the label was written, "Children with Black Eyes." That was no doubt the English translation of the film's title. The filmmaker's name was also written on the label. But there were 2 things on the label that confused and shocked me. Though all sources claim the film was made in 1913, this particular reel was dated to 1908. This could have been a mistake. Why would Moulin wait 5 years to show his movie? Then, I read the bottom of the label where the duration was written. The original film was 2 hours long,